I'm representing the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences. You may have heard us referred to as ACDS, and this is a special week for a number of reasons. It is National Apprenticeship Week. I'm the apprenticeship director for ACDS, and you've met Marie, and Lisa is joining us here, Lisa Wiggins, as our client services director. But what we're looking at is trying to highlight the various occupations within the IT profession. We've got so many new entrants coming into the workforce and using the apprenticeship model to become an IT professional that we've been kind of sharing with some experts like we have today to kind of share with you what that day in the life looks like, what a career, how it starts, how it continues, the excitement and the challenge around it. So we are fortunate today to have with us Taylor Otwell. He's the founder and CEO of Laravel Software. And so he can truly speak to what it means to be a software developer. And that's what we're hopeful today. And we want you to be thinking about questions and just, hear all of this great story today. So first of all, I want to just say thank you to Taylor for being here with us today. We're going to start by letting you introduce yourself to this audience. Tell a little bit about yourself and your background and then your company, just enough to kind of set the stage for our really interesting conversation today. Taylor?
Sure. So I grew up here in Arkansas in Hot Springs. I went to Lakeside High School, and then I was always kind of into tech stuff as a kid when I was growing up. I think I got my first computer when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and then later went to Arkansas Tech University and got a degree in information technology. And after that, I worked for Arkansas Best Freight in Fort Smith as a computer programmer. I worked there for several years before building Laravel and then eventually going out on my own. January 1st in 2015 was day one of my full-time Laravel employment. And ever since then, that's what I've been working on full-time.
That's tremendous. So what we're going to want you to tell us about is, when you first started, what was that day in the life of the software developer? And then even now, as you commented to me, you still spend a significant amount of your day as a software developer. So tell that novice person who's thinking about this profession what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, so I think an average day is going to be a mix of a few different things. It's going to be some actually writing code at your keyboard, like a tradition you might picture a programmer doing. You're also going to spend some time reviewing other people's code. So if one of your teammates or coworkers writes a new feature or is trying to fix a bug in a piece of software, you might go over that with them, look at the changes they made, and sort of sign off on that. That's called kind of a peer review system when you're programming. Or you might just be at a whiteboard sketching out, how you want to tackle a problem. You're not always necessarily going to be over a keyboard. You might be sketching out on paper or what you want something to look like or how you want it to work. So it's a mix of different things. I think a lot of people may have it in their mind that I'm going to be by myself at a keyboard in a cubicle all day. And it's not necessarily like that. You're going to do a variety of things throughout the day.
Taylor, you've learned this over the years, but was it different than, let's say you went through your degree program at Arkansas Tech and you had some preconceived idea of what maybe that first job and what this was going to be like? What did you think then, and what was really different once you got into the workplace?
Well, I really didn't know what to expect. Some things I didn't expect was how collaborative programming can be. I thought it was more of a solitary activity that, you picture someone in a dark room huddled over a computer, but really you're working with a lot of people, and you're not only working with other programmers, but you're working with other executives and other roles in the organization in different departments to solve their problems. Because at the end of the day, software exists hopefully to make our lives easier and not more frustrating. And if we're going to accomplish that, then you're going to have to interact with, you might be interacting with a CFO or a manager of a shipping department or something that needs a problem fixed in the software. And you're going to have to collaborate with them and communicate with them to figure out how to do that. And I didn't really expect that coming out of college necessarily. That's just something that surprised me when I got on the job.
Yeah, well, that's what we're looking for here in this conversation. So, are there some things that you look back now and you think of attributes that you have? What are those attributes that have really benefited you, that you think that if others who fall into those same kind of categories would see themselves as being successful? What attributes have been important?
I was always interested in kind of learning new things. Tech is a field that I think does move pretty quickly. There's always new tools and new technologies to try out. So if you find that exciting, I think that's something that you'll like about being a programmer. If you enjoy sort of planning out how to tackle a problem, or planning out how you want to structure something, you're going to be doing quite a bit of that as well as you write software. I think it's also important to be able to be a good communicator, to interface with these different end users and other people in the organization. And generally, one misconception I might say is some people think that I need to be really, really good at math to be a programmer. And that's something that I thought when I was growing up. And while you do need to know some math, you don't need to be a rocket scientist necessarily to become a software developer. So don't sell yourself short. I would say if you feel like maybe math, that you struggled in math in school, don't think I can never be a programmer, because I struggled in math in school too. And, I've been a programmer for well over 10 years now, so it can work out for you too.
So do you think that if we kind of dispel that math notion, but what
Yeah.
about things like just logic, being able to kind of think through and problem solve with options and
Yes.
if then else kinds of things? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we learned a lot about that at Arkansas Tech, basically what we would refer to as algorithms at Arkansas Tech, and being able to sketch out those sort of process flows, even on a whiteboard, I think is something that you're going to get comfortable with as a programmer, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. And I definitely think if you like doing that thing and you find that you're good at that kind of thing, maybe in other roles, then that's something that is going to benefit you as a programmer.
That's fantastic. So maybe one of the things that's going to lead to more of your story, and maybe not, but think back, and was there some interesting things that happened to you either at ABF or as you've begun, the new company and Laravel software, that really you
Mhm.
think is kind of a really interesting story that has to do with where you are today now in your career?
Yeah, well, let me just kind of fill in some of the background. So, when I was working at ABF, which I really enjoyed doing and learned a lot, I also had a lot of my own ideas, my own startups I wanted to get going, my own kind of side businesses I wanted to start. And I needed a really good way to build those out quickly, how to prototype those so I could see if they were viable, if they were going to be actual viable businesses I could start on the side. Um, and so I started tinkering with those in my free time at night, just coding in my free time. And I finished Laravel in about 6 or 8 months. And it's basically a tool that lets you get a head start if you want to build a web application or some sort of web software. It sort of gives you a head start in doing that. And I put it out there on a site called GitHub, which is now owned by Microsoft. And that's sort of a code sharing platform where I can share Laravel with the whole world for free, basically. And the cool thing is that anyone can contribute to it around the world. So people from literally dozens and dozens and dozens of countries have collaborated and contributed code to Laravel through GitHub. And so you can use code to do all sorts of interesting things and also interact with all sorts of interesting people around the world. And that's another thing I didn't realize, was this whole wide world of open source software where you have people from different countries and different ethnicities collaborating all on the same problem together. And I find that really fascinating and honestly really interesting and sort of satisfying to work on that every day.
So even before you broke out with your startup company, did you find that open source software, if you will, and using GitHub was beneficial for efficiency even at ABF? And did you
Oh
see
yeah.
other developers using that as well?
Yes, we used open source software every day at ABF in our own applications, both on the web and even in our older systems as well. And both the back end side and the front end side of web development, we use open source software. So it's really, open source software has permeated the world. Honestly, I would be surprised if there's any company that's not using some sort of open source software somewhere in their technology stack.
Yeah, for the novice, is there any reason why anybody would think that's not secure, or there's no downside? Maybe some of the fears that people would have when you use the term open versus proprietary. Just explain that from your expertise.
Yeah. So, of course, the difference is in an open source product, all of the code is available to the public for anyone to read. And you're right, that might lead you to to think, I feel more comfortable if I'm getting this code from a big corporation and I can't see the code. It feels more secure that way. And there are pros and cons to open source software, but one of the pros is because everyone can see the code, everyone can plainly identify any insecurities or problems in the software and work on it together and collaborate it. Whereas if the software is totally private and I can't inspect it, we can't pool all our resources together around the world to look at it and to work on it together. I think open source software has not really shown itself necessarily to be more insecure or more or worse than closed source software, and many times I feel like it's the opposite.
Yeah, well, that's good. I think people need to hear that, Taylor. And so now let's get back a little bit to the detail of, so you needed to find ways to do certain things on your job at ABF, and you're constantly thinking about what some of your side businesses might be. What was kind of that final inspiration that led you to Laravel? What are the details of what you now offer? And kind of tell us about how you became an entrepreneur, even though you're still a software developer.
Yeah. So as I was kind of building a way to build my own ideas faster, Laravel, at the beginning, Laravel was not the end goal. I just needed a way to build these businesses faster. And I built Laravel as a way to do that for myself. I was kind of solving my own problem, which I think you'll find is pretty common among programmers. They like to tinker with things and solve their own problems. But once I built Laravel, I thought, hey, maybe other people might like to do this or might like to use this in their own businesses and their own applications. So I wrote kind of a user manual, some documentation, and made a website for it and put it out there into the world. And now, like you said, the problem was I put it out there for free. So how am I actually going to make this sustainable? Which my family and my mom all found very, troubling that I've given this valuable software away for free. So it actually took me a couple of years to figure out how to build a business, a sustainable, profitable business around Laravel. And I tried a few different approaches. The first approach I took was I wrote an ebook about Laravel. I self-published an ebook about the framework, sort of going into deeper detail, more technical details than might be available in sort of the standard user documentation. But then what really broke the whole business open and made it profitable in a serious way where we could hire staff and things like that was I built a service called Laravel Forge, which basically completed the story. So I had built Laravel to help you build the product initially, to build the application on your own machine, and test it out. But you needed a way to ship that out to the world on your own website, such as like www.laravel.com. And Laravel Forge basically does that. It takes your Laravel application and helps you ship it out to the public internet, onto the web, configures your databases, configures all sorts of other things that you need to run that kind of software in production. And people pay monthly for that service. And so once that launched, very quickly, I had replaced my day job salary. And I was, I guess I'll go full time on this now because I couldn't maintain, Laravel and a regular job at the same time anymore.
Right. Well, and that's kind of very inspirational, I think, even to me as a 38-year veteran of IT, just knowing that possibility not only exists, but the technology and really allows you to take advantage of that, right?
And that's what I like to tell people that are interested in programming is the sky is truly the limit in terms of what you can accomplish in programming. So you can, if you feel entrepreneurial, I mean, you can start the next, Silicon Valley unicorn like Uber, or you can work in web development, you can work in game development, you can make your own software. It's just such a flexible skill to have and so powerful because you really are in control of your own destiny in a really powerful way if you know how to code.
And if you don't mind, Taylor, I'm going to put a little plug in, for ACDS and the fact that what we're doing is working with companies of all sizes, right? 2-person shops all the way to Walmart and everywhere in between. And so the fact that idea that somebody could start up and really do this on their own, or that you also said your role at ABF was enjoyable, that you enjoyed being part of that collaborative environment. And you think of companies across every sector, whether that was transportation and dispatch, whether it's retail, banking, what have you. So, I'm sure you've made a lot of acquaintances around the world that we want you to talk about here with Laravel. But maybe just share with people about how interesting you think that is when somebody takes the tools that can be used really for any business problem, right?
Mhm.
And puts that to use based on, what that particular industry sector focuses on. So yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, once you know how to code, you can apply those skills to any type of software you want. And I think once you have the base skills of how to do, solve basic algorithms like we were talking about, how to build basic programs, you can apply that in any sector. So all the skills I learned at ABF, I use a lot of those same skills today building Laravel, even though I'm not a trucking company. I'm very different than that. So your career path is going to be really wide in terms of what you can get into and what you can do. You're not going to be locked into one sector. You're not going to be locked into one field of business, so to speak. And the variety of programmers out there, you have programmers building software for rockets, and you have programmers building software for refrigerators, and it's just whatever you're interested in, there's something out there for you in programming, I think.
You also mentioned that while you're still doing development and you have a team, and where is that team? Are they around the world? Are you thinking about some of them being in Arkansas? I mean, what's that look like?
So they are around the world. I would like to have someone here in Arkansas so that I have someone to whiteboard with. But they're around the world. We were sort of a remote company even before being remote was cool, before the pandemic hit. So we have a developer in Egypt, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Portugal. So we're truly pretty global. But I would definitely love to have someone local, because I do miss that that in-person collaboration. It's just so fun and so valuable, and it's hard to replace. So that would be great someday.
Well, we'd like to team up with you on that. And hopefully the people listening in, somebody's sitting there visioning and going, man, I want to work with him, somewhere down the road, right? But, how about advice for those you mentioned, that the ones that think about being a game developer, or,
Mhm.
In any one of those things where they might vision that they're doing this all by themselves, right? Even though you did start this company by yourself, you really didn't, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
even how about the design elements of this? You talked about whiteboarding and so forth. Uh, how important is that now to kind of architect where you're headed next, and this whole idea of design that leads to how are you going to write the code to meet that that vision?
Yeah, so that's something that programmers think about a lot, and it's something that we try to drive home in ourselves. And programmers really want to get to the keyboard and start working. They want, that feels like being productive, and sometimes we don't want to stop and think about, wait a second, how does what we're doing actually make sense? Are we actually solving this problem in a way that's going to benefit the end user, and thinking through each step from a design process. And it's such a big topic in programming. As you may know, there's even different schools of how to design software, like agile software development and waterfall based software design, where you have these different methodologies for how to plan out how to build software and things like that. But that's something we're kind of constantly having to remind ourselves of as programmers is, hey, let's stop and think about this and design this a little bit, because we love to kind of get cranking on the keyboard and start coding.
That is just great advice. Great advice. How about anything else? If you think about, you have conferences around the world, right? Tell us a little
Yes.
bit about that. And then who are the participants in that? What do they look like? What does that mean for the future of our profession? And what would be advice for Arkansas?
Yeah, so we have our own conferences centered around Laravel. We call them Laracons. There probably will be one in 2022 in New York City, and there's smaller events around the country. Like even Little Rock has Little Rock Tech Fest, which I've attended and spoken at, where you're going to get a variety of talks, not just about Laravel and not just about PHP, which is the language Laravel is based on, but all sorts of different languages. And you're going to find other sorts of conferences around the country and around the world. We have a conference in Amsterdam and in Sydney, and those are really great events to attend as a developer. And I think if you're thinking about development, even attending one before you may even have a professional job doing development can be interesting for you, because there's going to be talks at a variety of skill levels, and you're going to network with a bunch of interesting people that may be valuable to you later in your career, making those connections in different fields throughout the programming world. And I really enjoy both attending and speaking at these events, because I always it's fun and it's inspiring to hear from other developers on what they're working on and what they're building, both at their own companies or at businesses they're starting in an entrepreneurial way. I always come away pretty energized and refreshed from those sorts of conferences.
Well, that's very effective, and I'm very familiar with large open source conferences around the country. And what you speak to is so true. Some of it is actually not just speaking, but you're actually training, right? In some ways, aren't you actually delivering skill building in some ways?
Yeah, so you'll see a variety of talks. So I actually do tend to give a very hands-on live code up on the screen type of talks where you can follow along on your own laptop and code along even. You'll also get talks that are not quite so technical in terms of coding, but they might be more around project planning. They might be more around team development or team productivity or testing software, things like that. So you're going to get a variety of talks. Some are going to be very technical. Some are going to be more collaborative and soft skill based. And there's usually a good mix at every conference.
Well, I'm going to take a brief moment, Taylor, and I'm going to invite the audience to, they've probably been thinking about it, maybe writing some questions down. We don't have any questions yet in the chat, but I'd like people to submit some questions and kind of put some things out there for you, because this has been pretty special. But as I'm buying them some time to think about those questions, I'm thinking of one additional thing, and that is that, you know, when is the right time for somebody to kind of consider that the business domain that they really are interested in is going to need tech, right? Every industry and every job is tech. So so what's the theory behind, you know, software runs the world? Even if they're not going to be a software developer, how important is it that they understand code, you know, and that software is on every device? You mentioned earlier some of those examples. Tell us a little bit about your thinking there.
So I think it's good to be generally familiar with the basic principles of coding and how web development and how data storage works, because it helps you know what's achievable. Some people, you know, they don't know quite what they can and can't achieve with software. They may be you know, have too small a vision or maybe too large a vision that's just not achievable in software at the moment. So understanding sort of the basic principles of how stuff is built at a tech level can help you as a business owner sort of know what you can actually pull off and what's feasible for your development team. I think that can be helpful for everyone, really.
That's so important. Seeing it happening, even you mentioned earlier about COVID forcing a lot of businesses to have to figure out new ways. You know, you think about face-to-face business that all of a sudden couldn't be face-to-face. So now all of a sudden, how are they going to reach a customer base? And did they have any kind of social media, web presence, what have you? Did that generate business for you, or did you just see some of your clients who then saw an increase in their business because of the phenomenon, if you will?
Yeah, we definitely saw an increase and our customers, you know, reported to us they were busier than ever sometimes, especially companies that build websites based on Laravel. So I created Laravel, but there's other development agencies out there that use Laravel to build projects for other companies. There's even companies in Little Rock that do that. And they reported to me, you know, we can barely hire enough people to even keep up with the demand for what people want to build. And I hear that all over the place, actually, is that people are having a hard time even finding as many good developers as they need, really. And it just seems to be a struggle all over the whole industry, and they just can't get enough of them.
So before these questions, here's my question. So now I've got a question directly for you. Maybe we should have an apprenticeship called a Laravel developer. Yeah. The trainer, you know, we talked about how the model of apprenticeship works. Somebody who they don't necessarily have to have a degree, they can come in with aptitude and passion, and we can
Hmm.
teach them tech, which you've proven you do at the open source conferences and all that. So now all of a sudden, if there's a demand and people are going, where are they going to come from? We've got this model to pay for training, right? So that
Hmm.
whoever's delivering it is getting paid, but at the same time, the individual doesn't have to pay for it like a boot camp.
Hmm.
So it's been
Right.
a very, very beneficial model. So I throw that out for those who are listening in, and maybe they come back to us and say, "Hey, I want to be one of those Laravel developers." So if people need to
Hmm.
find where the talent's coming from, they can be part of that talent pool.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh, so at your conferences, how big? I mean, what's been the largest conference that you've run around the world?
So our first conference in 2013 was in Washington, D.C. with just 100 people. But our last one in 2019 was in Times Square with about 1,000 people at the PlayStation Theater, the Sony PlayStation Theater. And that was just a really amazing event. The events in Europe can be even larger, over 1,000 people. And then the event in Sydney was a few hundred people. So these are big events, and people are just, it's hard to explain. It's almost like it's the highlight of their year, basically, to come to these big conferences. And they're just so excited to be around other programmers that are interested in the same things. And it's honestly, it's a big social event and a big technical learning event all in one, basically.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, hey, here's the first of these questions. So, gentleman Rolando has said, in the beginning, where you started, what was the type of programming? You mentioned you're using PHP right now as your kind of base software, but what about in the beginning? Where did you start?
Yeah, so where I started at ABF is really interesting because I started with a mix of a language called C Sharp, which is a .NET language created by Microsoft, and that's a new language. But what I was also doing, so I was doing new stuff, and I was also maintaining code written in COBOL that was written literally before I was born. I was born in 1986, and I was routinely updating programs that were still being used by ABF that were written in the mid 1970s. Some of them at that time the current CEO of ABF, who started as a programmer. So that was a really interesting mix of using cutting edge new technology and also technology that was literally older than I was. And the crazy thing was, so much of these big businesses like Arkansas Best and like banking industries and credit card industries are running on COBOL code that is decades and decades old, and it is still functioning effectively. So it was an interesting mix, and it was a really good start to my career, I think, because I got exposed to both the cutting edge and the history of where everything has come from. And so I learned a lot during those first few years.
And again, goes back to my career, but this is your great message. That interoperability, or that need to have to integrate, in an environment where you aren't starting from scratch all the time, right? You're starting, especially in businesses, with an existing architecture or a platform of how to connect new things to legacy things. So again, you kind of described that pretty well, but what would be the attributes that gave you the ability to gain value from that? Big picture thinking, or what kind of was?
Not yeah, big picture thinking, and not discounting the lessons learned in the past, of programming. As a young programmers tend to want to sort of say, oh, I'm only focused on the cutting edge stuff, but there's been so many lessons learned throughout the history of computer programming, since basically the 1950s and 60s, that even old programming books, that still have so much valuable knowledge in them of all the lessons learned from the programmers that sort of developed stuff before us. And it's easy to discount all that as a new programmer that's building iPhone apps or building mobile games, but there's so much history there to learn from that I think we shouldn't really discount it, as when you first get into the field.
Fundamentally, this is a question from Dee Dee that says, would you recommend what's a first language that has the components that make for a good fundamental starting point as a programming language?
So I think some of the most accessible languages, some of the easiest to learn, PHP, which is Laravel is written in, would be one of them. It's a popular first language because it's so easy to get started in, and there's so much learning material around it. You can even go to laracast.com and watch free video tutorials on getting started both with PHP and Laravel. There's also a language called JavaScript, which is a popular language because it's pretty pervasive throughout the web. It's used both on the front end and on the back end of the web nowadays. And so if you do anything on the web, you're most definitely going to run into JavaScript at some point. So I think those are two good starting points that both have a lot of learning material around them and are pretty accessible languages and easy to understand just by reading them. They kind of read a little bit like plain English, and so you can kind of see what's going on. Right. So those are two good starting points, I think.
Very good. Very good. Here's another one. So somebody thinking about your mention of 4 to 5 hours a day in still writing code, how do you stay focused? How do you stay motivated, while you're coding? And are there some things about just time management that you think is good best practice?
Yeah, so I stay motivated by seeing, I think, the excitement and satisfaction that the software brings to other people. So when people tell me, hey, Laravel, what you built with Laravel or what you built in this piece of software, it really just made my life so much easier. And thank you so much for doing that, and how excited they are about it. I think that's going to really energize you as a programmer. And you will encounter that even in big organizations. If you build something for a department head, some piece of software, and it just really clicks for them and really makes their life a lot easier, to me, that's just really fun to do and really awesome and motivates me. As far as time management on myself, I am a pretty organized person. I would say a pretty meticulous person. So what I do is I actually have a to-do list at the start of each day. That's just the task that I want to hit that day, my high level things I want to visit. And then at the beginning of the next day, I'll make a new one for that day. And I just sort of work on a day-to-day basis like that. And anything I didn't finish the day before, I'll just copy over to my to-do list from today. So that's kind of how I operate day to day. And that's how I've done it actually ever since I was in college at Arkansas Tech.
Very much best practice there. I would agree with you. Here's another one. This comes from Mark McManus over at the Office of Skills Development. Can you give the audience a sense of the types of end products and or customers that represent kind of the significant portion of your client base, just as an idea?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Laravel, and I can compare it to something that, people might be familiar with, something like WordPress, which you can use to build blogs with. And that's sort of an off-the-shelf solution for a certain type of website. But what Laravel does is let you build kind of more bespoke applications. So the end user application is going to be really varied. So I've seen job ads from Apple computers looking for Laravel developers. I've seen job ads from the New York Times looking for Laravel developers. I've seen job ads from the United States Army looking for Laravel developers. So the end user applications are truly limitless because Laravel is for creating bespoke custom web applications. So those are some of the types of companies I've seen using Laravel. I've seen Starbucks use Laravel. Twitch, a popular gaming site, I've seen them use Laravel. So just all over the place, really.
That's due a big congratulations to you. I think that's a sign of just tremendous success. And I think everybody on this call, we want to acknowledge that you're here and you're doing this in Arkansas, and we appreciate you. I don't have any additional questions showing up in the chat right now. I'm going to buy people just a little bit more time, but how do you manage your development team remotely? And, we're finding a lot of our apprenticeship models have been fully remote. And so we've proven it can be done. But what are some things you take into account to do it well?
So we all, like many of you, I'm sure, use sort of a remote chat program called Slack to stay in touch with each other throughout the day. We use other productivity tools, project management tools like Basecamp, for example. And then one thing that's interesting, when we were programming in person, you would do what's called pair programming, where you have a person sitting next to you and you're kind of programming at the keyboard while they watch along and contribute and maybe bounce ideas off each other. It's a pretty popular practice in development. And there's actually tools for doing that remotely, a tool called Tuple, where they can actually, it's kind of like Zoom, but more geared for programming together, where they can actually take control of my keyboard and help program along with me and pair program. So we do some of that as well. So there's been a lot of, ever since, coronavirus happened, there's been a lot of development in this field of how do we figure out how to do programming together in a remote world. And so there's been some cool tools built around that in the last couple of years.
Excellent. And you know, that is kind of another example of just how dynamic the profession of IT and everything we're doing is. It's been changing, you know, ever since I can remember, and it's going to continue to be at a pace that we just try to keep up. So this idea of skill development, you know, I guess one final piece for young folks, as they're, you know, the coding initiative is something that Arkansas is leading the country in terms of. Our governor initiated that at every school. There's 10, 12,000 kids now that are, you know, in a coding course. So with all of that, I think you've given, you know, your advice about how to kind of look for the first job or the first opportunity. But any final piece of awareness that you would encourage even folks that maybe, you know, might have otherwise said, "Oh, I don't think I can do that," or whatever. What would you find to be something that might help them overcome that stigma?
So even though I went through kind of a more traditional programming education route, I would say at least 50%. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than 50% of the people I come across at Laracon and other programming conferences that are doing programming seriously are self-taught outside of the traditional education model, in the sense that they maybe didn't get a 4-year degree in programming, but maybe they were always interested in tech. They're interested in, you know, the latest gadgets and tinkering around with things, and they just sort of taught themselves over the years using a lot of times just free online resources or some sort of apprenticeship program where you can learn a lot just doing something like that. Especially, I would say, I learned the most when I was kind of apprenticing under someone in those first few months at Arkansas Best. That's where I really, you know, fine tuned my programming chops, so to speak, was in that environment. So, you know, there's and that's going to be more and more common. I think you're going to see so many programmers that did not necessarily go to college for programming, and they're going to be successful in development careers.
Well, that's certainly been the approach through the apprenticeship model, and it's flat out working. We got more IT apprentices in the state of Arkansas over the last 18 months than any other state in the country. So
Yeah, that's
kudos to
great.
everybody that's had a hand in that. One couple questions, and then we're going to have to probably bring this to a close. You mentioned earlier about the things that were pretty good about open source software development, and maybe even the fact that people can contribute to that, and they're not even on their first, you know, programming job yet. So tell us a little bit more about open source environment. And then you mentioned, it says, what are the skills and attitudes you're looking for when you hire somebody for your team? So as opposed to just you personally, what do you think is going to be complementary to your team? So final two questions all kind of wrapped into one.
Yeah, so open source is an interesting phenomenon. There's probably millions of open source libraries out there, and basically, like I said, anyone can contribute to the code on GitHub, and you know, it's sort of a volunteer effort, volunteer collaborative effort, maintaining all of the software around the world. And some of this software runs some of those most important functions on the internet today, basically. And it's interesting because it is all volunteer. So some cool things Microsoft has done with GitHub is opened up a GitHub sponsorship program where if you use an open source tool that you like, you can donate, say, $1 a month or $2 a month to that developer that's volunteering their time. And it's sort of like a little tip jar on GitHub where you can contribute to these people, and companies can even do bigger sponsorships. So that's been a cool development in open source recently. And the other question about, you know, what we're looking for when hiring, a lot of it is just a willingness and eagerness to learn and to be interested in programming. I feel like, honestly, if someone wants to learn programming, almost anyone can apply themselves and do it. And because there's so many resources out there and people that can teach you to do it. So if you're interested in it and you have a passion for it, I think that's really important. And then also, if you're a good team player, I would say, and can collaborate with your teammates and build software effectively, that's going to be really good too.
Well, that's just, I couldn't ask for a better answer. You have been a delight to interview today. Hopefully this was kind of a nice flowing dialogue. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And,
yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. And thanks to everybody that's joined us today. We've had a nice crowd of folks in and out, and a lot of questions. So we've recorded this whole thing. You'll be able to to find this out on YouTube and other ways that we'll be kind of, producing this to give you avenues to share it with other people. If you know of others that had wanted to be on this today and they didn't get a chance to make it, why pass it along? Because there was a lot of good gems of information here. Taylor, best of luck to you as you continue. I can't wait to go to Laracon in New York City or wherever the next one is.
All right. Thanks a lot.
And so thank you everyone for being here.